Thank you for the opportunity to speak, and I welcome everyone to San Antonio. And thank you so much to Sheila. I think without AAPS and Sheila, we never would have gotten the MOC legislation done in Texas, and I think it has just been really stellar, and she's amazing. So generally, I've talked about macro and some other things, but I really felt that for Texas, and really on the heels of what Dr. Page was saying, we have got to fight for point of care dispensing in Texas. It's amazing that we're one of the few states that do not have it. And so I'm hoping that our Texas chapter will take this up, because to our mission and our calling, we must remain true. And we have to ask ourselves every day, whom do we serve? And how can we serve our patients amidst these forces that seek to manipulate and control us? And this brings us back to the struggle for the soul of healthcare, and I think this ties our whole conference here today back together. Looking back to the ancient struggle that began with Plato, as we talked about earlier, that doctors may refrain from curing the weak and infirm to improve society, versus his contemporary Hippocrates, who felt that physicians work on behalf of the patient, not for the good of the state. And I've been working with my good friend C.L. Gray, who authored a book called that talked about the battle for America's soul, and he was talking about what Dr. Thompson, Judy was talking about. We've been in D.C. and we're working with a group of physicians, a coalition across the country, to try to counteract this safe harbor that has enabled this PBM atrocity to go on. And again, who do we serve, the patient or the state? Because with our current situation, things are very dismal. Patients are suffering from drug shortages, and restricted formularies, usurious prohibitive cost, and innovation is impeded, and physicians are suffering. We're having to jump through senseless hoop upon hoop, manpower and financial drain, wasted resources, loss of authority, autonomy, and access to drugs. And really, what's interesting is that when our physicians' prescriptions were actually orders, they're now nothing more than requests to be run through a perversely incentivized, ever-changing obstacle course. And I really feel that these delays, denials, and obstructionism is a business model of these companies. You know, every day that their money, they are given the government subsidies and the premiums go to the insurance companies, they profit by keeping that money, and that was referred to in a talk earlier. And just think, every day that their money's in the bank, they get millions of dollars worth of interest. And they are the de facto rationers. So through the prior authorizations, the step edits, the quantity limits, they're successfully doing this. I've had Blue Cross Blue Shield. I'm completely out of network. I have agreements with no one, not even Medicare. And I still have them demanding and harassing my patients who I go to bat for. They demand my chart notes, and I say they have no right to them. I write them a letter, and I address every issue in their request, their step edit, and they say, I've been told my patients signed away their privacy rights when they accepted the conditions of their insurance. They said read the small print, and I wonder if any of us know that if we're on any insurance, we've signed away our rights according to what the insurance companies tell us, and I think that needs to be challenged. And again, the group purchasing organizations are on the inpatient side, the equivalent of the PBMs on the outpatient side. And these are truly, if you look at it in the history of it, racketeering schemes that are contributing to life-threatening drug shortages. So how can we outsmart them, and how can we serve our patients? We need point-of-care dispensing, because it doesn't help me to be totally out of network and agreements with no one when I can't get them their meds. It doesn't help me to see my patients for free providing to charity when they can't get their meds. So our ability to dispense medications directly to patients from our office or our point of service, for those of us who are now making house calls, is something that we must do, point of service care. It's permitted in most states. Each individual state has its own unique limits on physician dispensing practices. Physician dispensing, that's the practice where doctors dispense repackaged medication, and we need to talk about some wording, out of their office directly to the patient. What is repackaging? The act of taking a finished drug product from its original container and placing it in a different container without manipulating the drug. And I think those like Dr. Josh Umber in Kansas and other states that have this, you know, you can order 1,000 Lipitor and you can give 30 to each patient. And of course that has to be very carefully regulated, because if you touch it to penicillin and then a patient comes in and encounter a molecule of that, then they could have anaphylaxis. We all know about that. But this needs to be done very, very carefully. It requires compliance with state and federal laws governing labeling and packaging of the meds, as well as the storage and other security measure requirements. It's highly regulated as far as labeling, billing, and the legal penalties for noncompliance could be excessive. But there is a third-party industry to help with the labeling and storage and documentation, tracking, billing, and collections. And this can be good, but of course then we need to be careful about that too, because I'm sure the PBMs, and they'll just be all ready to go get in on that too. So why do repackaging? What is it? You take that finished drug product, place it in a different container because it reduces the medication errors. Think about it. We're doing it in our office ourselves. We're not sending them out. So it reduces the medication errors, convenience, distribute a large quantity of bulk meds in smaller packages, cost, control, and access to the meds. So these are the reasons. Save patients money, save our patients time, reduce the error rate, it's convenient, ensures patients fill their prescriptions. Basically, when patients leave your office, 60 to 70% will fill their meds. That means 30 to 40% never even go fill them. So with better communication, they'll return for follow-up to get their meds. There's access in rural areas, confidentiality, and there's a little profit in it, maybe. Now, what are the cons? Profit. The companies that do this say there could be the potential to take advantage of repackaging to inflate the costs, but this could never even approach what the PBMs and everyone else do. Overprescribing, easier access to narcotics, overwhelming labeling and billing requirements, financial loss, legal risk, and Stark laws. This is the last thing we want to take on, but it's something that I think we need to do. There are regulations.
What about Stark laws?
Well, the things that we were talking about, like with pharmacies in our office, this sort of thing, okay? So because we've been accused, if you do this, and this goes on a lot, people do it. I know ophthalmologists, like when we give people their post-op drops and all this, but you can get accused of being, like operating a retail pharmacy from your office. I mean, this sort of thing, okay? So there are 3 types of regulations in the different states, and this basically tells the different states, and you can look on these different websites and see what each state policy is. But basically, there's 3 categories, and the NDC is the National Drug Code. And the first one is states require repackaged meds to be billed under their original manufacturing code. 2, states prohibit doctors from collecting a dispensing fee, and pharmacies are allowed to do this. And 3, states may prohibit physicians from dispensing meds from their office unless it's an emergency or the patient is from a rural area where they don't have access, and that's how it is in Texas. So what about the professional dispensing fee? In some states, this now averages about $9 to $13 a prescription. There's a very complex calculation goes on in the PBM contracts. This is really interesting. The PBM contracts determine the ingredient cost and the dispensing fee. And so there's a new CMS rule that's just come out. It's like 625 pages, and it's come up with a new formula that says how this will be done. But in the past, it's been as low as $1 to $2 a prescription. Okay, so did you know, and Ray talked about this a little bit, there is a pay-to-play system going on right now. About $600 billion a year in the medical supply chain is being, there's a supply chain dysfunction that's going on because of the group purchasing organizations on the inpatient side and the PBMs on the outpatient side. And it forces manufacturers of drugs and medical devices to pay kickbacks to purchase market share. And this is now sometimes contributing to over 50% of the cost of medications. So the GPOs is inpatient medications and devices. The PBMs are the outpatient medication and devices. There's 7 middlemen companies that allocate this market share, and it amounts to, can you imagine this, $200 billion a year in kickbacks. And the people that do not do any research, produce, buy, sell, or anything, they're just the middlemen negotiating the deals. The hospital GPOs control the purchase of over $300 billion a year of drugs, devices, supplies for 5,000 hospitals, thousands more outpatient clinics and other facilities. The PBMs assert control over the outpatient drugs and devices, and they compete with, so think about this, you have to compete to get your products on the formularies. So like if you want your drug on the formulary, you gotta pay, and then you have to participate in this whole scheme, and then they raise the prices of the drugs to offset the cost. So on the inpatient side, there's Vizient, Premier, Health Trust, and Interlayer. And these 4 giant GPOs account for over 90% of the total GPO contracting volume. On the outpatient side, these 3 huge companies we talked about, United Health Group, which is, of course, associated with United, CVS Caremark, and Express Scripts, control over 70% of all prescriptions dispensed in the United States for an aggregate net revenue of $337 billion. Dr. Bob Campbell, I really think, is a current hero of ours. He has done exceptional work on this, and he formed Physicians Against Drug Shortages. It doesn't cost anything to join. Everyone needs to join immediately and look online. And some of the things that are happening, and this has got to be addressed, and this is what Judy was talking about earlier. If there is legislation that exists, if anyone is bold enough or brave enough, because realizing that if $200 billion are at stake every year, they use just 10% of that lobbying. That's $2 billion a year that's used against us and our patients. So think about insulin right now. The average cost of insulin to a patient when they purchase it is $400. As an ophthalmologist, I see more and more patients going without their insulin. They simply cannot afford it. When you're spending that much in premiums, they go without their insulin. The actual cost of it would be about $80-something. And if we got rid of this safe harbor and we reintroduced free market, people could get their insulin for $40 a month. Think about it, and the anesthesiologists have been big on this because they go to the hospital in the morning and they say, do we have bupivacaine? What do we have to put in to provide spinal anesthesia to our women who are going to be having C-sections and giving birth today? And there are women having to have general anesthesia, which is putting the babies and the women at greater morbidity because drugs don't exist that have been around for years that we should have, all because of these contracts that they make. Non-compete, secret, non-transparent contracts between the companies and the PBMs. IV saline, remember that? Oh, we don't have saline. Okay, what about saline? Oh, well, there was the hurricane. Come on, guys. Ask yourself, why does the United States of America only make salt water in Puerto Rico? Maybe because Baxter and these other people have a huge non-compete contract. And they're working on some 60-minute pieces with some whistleblowers that show how bad this is. The EpiPen, what do you think happened there? Even IV Tylenol. And there was even an outbreak that was attributable to this problem a few years ago where they were trying to compound some medications that people needed and they got meningitis. The generic are being put out of business. Manufacturing plants are being put and shut down. There's drug shortages and innovation is hindered. And I've had to deal with this with my own family. Here's my sweet daughter who was in a terrible wreck. And we learned when she was in the surgical ICU that IV Tylenol was the best drug in the world for her. A year later, when she was in the MICU with another problem, she was not allowed to have IV Tylenol because of hospital GPO purchasing problems unless she was in the SICU. In which case, for a huge fever from pyelonephritis, she was only allowed to have oral Tylenol. And when you're not keeping anything down, and in severe pain, that required her to have IV Dilaudid with its problems. IV Phenergan, from which she had thrombophlebitis and a sclerosed vein, so that she could hold down her oral Tylenol. We are abusing our patients when we have technology and innovation available to us. And so our increased patient risk is unethical, and we must not blindly play along with this. So that's why we have physician-led strategic messaging to lower the cost of drugs and medical devices, advance stepwise free market health care. And we must all help with this to restore free market competition and put the patient back at the center. So real life in ophthalmology, here's a choice of all my glaucoma drops that I can save vision and the quality of life for people. And really the drug companies are dictating what my patients will get. Individual patients, as you all know, have distinct needs, and not every patient can use every drop. It ruins their corneas, it ruins their lids. And I have patients that we go to extreme measures to try to get them on the appropriate eye drop so that they can see. And all I get day after day is that my prescription is no longer an order, but a request, and it's denied. And this is a real-life example of a patient I've had for over 20 years. We've kept him seeing. He's on 2 meds finally after numerous visits, and we've gotten him stable. I get this from him. He has to call. What am I going to do? I'm on Medicare. My PBM says I can't have my drugs. And fortunately, they won't tell us what they're going to pay. If you call up and you say, what will my patient pay for X, Y, or Z? They won't tell you. They say it depends on their insurance. It depends on their deal. Everything's non-transparent and everything's a deal. It's the corporate malpractice of medicine. It's leading to pain, suffering, and blindness for me and morbidity for other patients. So my patient called and actually did the calculations of what he used to pay, what he's paying now, and we were able to see what was going on with this. So they say no to Lumigan, yes to Zioptan. Well, how do we know what they're going to say yes and no to? We don't. It's all based on the business deals. It's all based, right now, what's on the formularies is based on business deals and a pay-to-play scheme, not what's best for the patients. The tail wags the dogs. This is one of my texts, and she's pulling her hair out, as am I, as we all jump through these hoops that are not patient-centric. And here's just a few of the coupons and kickbacks and everything we get out for the patients and try to help them with. But it's gotten really absurd. So this is my patient. He was 69, glaucoma. He has Medicare with AARP, United Healthcare Supplement. Optimarum is PBM. So he was on Lubigan, and he would pay about $12.90 a month. His new amount, no insurance changing, but the business deals changed. They want $226 a month. This is a small 5 ml bottle of drops. Now, with approval, if I go through all the hoops, he can pay a third and then pay only $74.67 a month. This is a teaspoon of drops. And look, it's a 5 or 6 time increase just because they can. He is a Medicare patient. That's just one drop. Now, the other drop he's on, now they said you can take an alternative replacement drop. The top one's a generic, $5.30 a month. I can sell that in my office for less than that. I can buy it for less than that. So if we're going to do that, let's be the one to sell it to our patient for $5. Now, the other drop, they said I could use Zioptan. Look at that one, $1,300 for 90 days, a teaspoon of drops. And that's from another deal. But that would come out to be $147 a month for him, a tier 1, for 1 drop a day. So it's ridiculous. His other drop, same sort of thing. He was paying $15.50 a month. With approval, he could pay $112 a month. That's ridiculous. They gave me some alternatives. But again, those are the drops that all made his cornea go to pot and made his eyelids terrible. Now, I learned this from Josh Humbert with Atlas MD. You can go online to AndaMeds, and you can order drops for your office and sell them. He could get the drops for $2 a month and the latanoprost for $2 a month. So, I mean, if we're going to let the drug companies yank us around, let's sell it in our office for $2 a month and maybe collect $1 dispensing fee. And these are the sorts of things when we're writing a bill we need to do, and we need to take our profession back. My patient can go at the front, buy it. I know what he's got. I know he's going to get treated. And I'm not going to be pulling my hair out in my staff. There's another company called Imprimis, and they are a compounding pharmacy, and they've come up with all sorts of drugs and mix, and they're preservative-free. And what we're having to do here in Texas, because you can buy them, many states they do, and sell them to your patient. In Texas, what we have to do is we have to fax them what we want. They call the patient. The patient gives them a credit card. It's a little bit convoluted, but it's another way that we can get the patients their medications. And this works not just with drops, but they do other things as well. So as far as eye drops, this doesn't require repackaging. This just requires me being able to purchase and sell the medications to the patients at just a little bit above cost to cover my my time and my staff and overhead. So perioperative drops, I have patients going without. I spend more time talking to my patients about the cost of their drugs and how to get them than I do with surgery. These are 3 drops I might give them pre-op. I don't know if they're going to go to the base and get them for $0, have a copay, get them for $60. I've had patients come in and have to pay more than $600 for their drops, which I tell them absolutely do not do, but sometimes they don't know and they don't listen and they do it, which is more than the surgeon gets paid to do their surgery. So what we've got to do is educate ourselves, and we need to understand what's going on. And here's just another example of that the insurance company this time won't pay for another one. They wanted, a patient was very well controlled on an eye drop, and now they told him they want $817 for 3 months, even with approval. So my patient just went without his drops and came in with a high pressure and losing vision. Here's another one, Zioptan. I never know what's going to be covered or not. Some will cover this, some will cover that. It's basically a crapshoot when they come in. It's just never ending. These are all the different companies, and certainly there's drops available for dry eye, and they won't give them. It's a guaranteed prior authorization. And this is what I was talking about earlier, how Blue Cross Blue Shield wants I can't just write them a letter, a professional letter. They want my actual chart notes. Here's an example of an appeals just from one patient. I laid these out on the floor. I can fill out all these appeal forms. It's really insanity for my patients, and I know you all are going through this too. This is really interesting. What do the PBMs do? The PBMs in their deals made it so that they can adjust their costs if situations change. So imagine if you agreed to sell your house and then kind of the economy changes and you change your price. It's amazing how these PBMs are so horrible. This is always my favorite form. Every language, I can appeal in every language. So anyway, this is really interesting. Now they're creating fourth-party intermediaries to battle the third parties. So this is a company that'll help me fight them. So really, guys, the only way not to lose is not to play, and it's game over. And I think the same people doing the fourth parties are the people who make the prior authorizations harder, so then they'll help you have another company to fight the prior authorizations. So what are we going to do? And we need to understand this. What's the difference between controlled and non-controlled prescriptions versus over-the-counter name brand and generic? And the Drug Enforcement Agency is the one that decides the difference between controlled and non-controlled. And remember, there's drug schedules, and we need to all understand this. There's 1 through 5. And the worst, we will never prescribe any level 1. These are the ones that horrible, you're not going to prescribe heroin, LSD. We'll never write for these. We'll never prescribe them, okay? 2 through 5, it's very logical. They're in descending order, the likelihood that you'll become addicted to them. And some of them you can see on Schedule 5 are like Robitussin and cough drops. So some cough medications. So there are some scheduled drugs that we're going to need to write for. The only ones that require a triplicate form are Schedule 2. And I think one of the things we need to do in Texas we call this, every drug that's a prescription drug is called a dangerous drug. And I think we need to change that nomenclature. And what does dangerous drug mean? It means it's unsafe in Texas. And I've taken all the things I'm showing you straight out of law. I'm just showing it there so you'll know where to go and have a reference. It's the Dangerous Drug Act, and it's anything that's unsafe for self-medication not included in Scheduled 1 through 5. So right now, what is the pharmacy? What's the duty of the pharmacy? The pharmacist and the practitioner. Pharmacist's duty is to determine the validity of a prescription. Well, we know if it's valid, we wrote it. So if we're able to do it in our office, we're able to achieve that. Here's some questions. Dispensing drug from medical practice. Can a physician dispense drugs such as IV preparations in their office? No, we can't, not in Texas. And can a physician purchase medications from a pharmacy and then sell them to his or her patients? In Texas, again, only for a short period of time in emergency. So what are we going to do about this? Here's what the Texas State Board of Pharmacy says about a controlled drug, and we have to understand that. We talk about the non-controlled. Non-controlled are most of what we write, 90% of it. Antibiotics, hypertensive meds. And so 90% of the time we're going to be writing for non-controlled drugs in our office that don't require any sort of DEA number. So we need to have the authority to provide the meds for our patient, because then we have access, and we need to do more than in Texas. All we can do right now is immediate need and free samples. Now, the pharmacists and pharmacy have their own laws in there, and the Board of Pharmacy is going to fight Texas on this, even though, as we saw earlier, the PBMs are putting them out of business, and they should be our allies, and we need to win them over. Some of the things we'll need to do, pharmacy needs to retain the prescription for 2 years, and we need to maintain a record of acquisition and disposal for 2 years. That's easy to do. Then they talk about definitions of dangerous drug, delivering, designated agent, and dispensing, and there's some very specific definitions for this. And deliver means sell, dispense, give away. It's even giving away or supplying in any way a drug. And the designated agent is a licensed nurse, a PA, a pharmacist. I think what we're going through, we need to limit to physicians. And, okay, so, and practitioner. I really do think when we're starting out with this that it needs to be just physicians doing this. One other thing in the macro, and this is the other thing, when I read macro, I was really shocked in the initial 243-page law that was passed. There was a section in there kind of towards the back where it said, as of 2016, a valid NPI number is required in order for a prescription to be honored. And then it had this little paragraph that said that the Secretary of Health and Human Service has the power to determine what constitutes validity. So could you imagine if we still, depending on the Secretary of Human Services, she says you only have your NPI is only valid if you participate in Medicare, or it's only valid if you do MOC, or it's only valid if you do this. This is a real way for the federal governments to have control over us. So I believe that we have to get rid of this, and they have no right to say whose NPI number is valid and require that on a prescription. If they do, if we have the right to dispense out of our office, we can get around that. We need to find ways to stay autonomous. So what's our action plan? The safe harbor repeal, macro repeal, and get rid of that NPI number requirement. State law, legalize point of care, prescribing, and we need to define terms: who, what, where, and what's a dispensing fee. Because, we can't lose money on it. We don't need to use it as a profit center. maybe make a little bit. We can't lose money. I mean, as my husband's in business and somebody said, oh, you should do that for free. And he looked at him, he said, do you get paid for what you do? So this is what I would hope that the Texas chapter of AAPS could do, that this year we could vote and the board, maybe y'all can vote to undertake to pursue. And I know that you guys tried to do this before and you have such great experience with Texas policy that you could vote to pursue law to legalize point of service prescribing. We could develop the policy and the language of the bill. We could identify potential sponsors of the bill in the Senate and the House, and there's already some that we could. Recruit allies. Maybe we can get pharmacy to be our ally now. We need to be ready to refute the opposition. We need to have messaging, funding, education. We need to visit Austin, and we need to develop a timeline to do this because this comes up fast. So our opposition, I just was looking this up, and this was the call to action advocacy alerts from the pharmacists. We need to know their plays, win them, educate them, and then win them over. So really the buck stops with us. If you look at a lot of their arguments against us, they say that like doctors only had 1 semester of pharmacy and we've had 8 years. Okay, now they don't even do med school like that. They have modules. So if you want to say we have no pharmacy, we do pharmacy in everything we do all day long. We know what we're doing. The buck stops with them. We don't need them. And I couldn't believe, I was really surprised that Governor Perry, when he was there, everybody in Texas backed the pharmacies. And they say, oh my gosh, well, what'll this do to the pharmacies? Look, guys, yeah, they're regulated, high standards of care. The physician's office do not have these standards. Well, we can get them, and we can do it, and we can do it better. So we need to be ready the buck stops with us anyway. So we need to learn from the past, re-engage our allies. Here's the old bill, and you can go online and track the bills and see what happened. They didn't get far at all. But they had one for aesthetic medications, and then they had the other one, and this was the one, it even says who Shaheen did this one. Now, is this another responsibility we must take on? And this is from some of these companies that help you do it. How much time will it take? Well, it can actually save time because we waste all the time calling the pharmacies and doing everything else. It takes less than 1 minute to dispense the medication to a patient because they've got a manual. You can get this stuff you can order a kit and you can have a way to manually track it. Think about it. In ophthalmology, I'm not going to have that many meds in my office. I'm going to have drops. I mean, dermatology, I have something. You know, how many prescriptions do we all really do? We can have our main ones. I mean, you could have your top 10 in your office, and then the rest you can send out. And you can master this in a couple hours. They have software. Is dispensing the same as being a pharmacy? No. We may only do prepackaged meds. We may do, typically, they said the typical thing, and a lot of since the other states do this, there's experience with it, they may be stocked 15 to 30 of their most commonly prescribed things. So 80% of all prescriptions come from total 20% of the number of drugs that you prescribe. So you have a key formulary in your office. And then they talk about the different specialties that are good for this, but look right at the top, family practice. So there's companies that you can use, easy to dispense, all this sort of thing, and you can hire on with these, or people can be innovative and do their own. And this is just from some companies that you can use to help you do this. So what we need to do is research and learn from the pearls and pitfalls from other states and their various policies. And then finally, I'm on my last slides here. We need to rename the dangerous drugs non-controlled prescription drugs. We need to legalize point-of-care dispensing and non-controlled drug. Define designated agent specifically for point-of-care, and I would say physician only. Allow non-controlled prescription medication or device to be sold to patient at cost plus a nominal fee to cover handling, administrative, regulatory compliance costs. And we could talk about that. Keep the feds out of it by fixing MPI loophole in MACRA. Create a model outside the GPO. We got to find this way around, like Ray said, the GPO and the PBM monopsony while fighting the anti-kickback safe harbor appeal, and go for repackaging. And this is what we need stat. We need this medication, and I like the memes, and this is one I want to get. We need Groaset, 2 capsules a day. It's a wonderful testicular fortitude capsules. And here's my daughter that was so sick, and she doesn't even need Groaset. This was her the other day. She's, Mom, I'll be late for Mother's Day. I went snake hunting. But anyway, this maintains testicular fortitude to equip us to identify, confront, and outmaneuver insidious forces that threaten our autonomy and ability to care for our patients. We must constantly act to secure our blessings of liberty to serve our patients first. It's not easy, but it's necessary. It's not only our responsibility, but our ethical obligation. That's it.